My name is Danielle Harris, and for 10 years I was my family's human safety net. I paid their rent when my father was laid off, covered my mother's surgery bills, and even funded my brother's college tuition. I thought my sacrifice was a form of love. They saw it as an obligation. The night before my brother's wedding, they repaid me by telling me not to come. In the living room where I grew up, my mother said my presence would make things uncomfortable and overshadow the groom. They cast me aside like a tool that was no longer useful. They expected me to break, to cry, and to disappear quietly. They were wrong about one thing. They forgot the one secret my grandfather left me, and that secret was about to turn their perfect day into an unforgettable disaster. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. To truly comprehend the crushing weight of that exile, you have to look back, not just at the money, but at the moments. 10 years of moments, each one a thread in the tapestry of my servitude. My life as their daughter had been a long, slow lesson in self-erasure, and I had been a diligent student. The mantra was always the same, a quiet hum beneath every request, every demand: family first. A phrase that sounds like love but is, in the wrong hands, a shackle. It began in earnest the year my father lost his job. He wasn't just laid off. A part of his spirit was amputated. He had worked at the same manufacturing plant since he was 19. His identity so entwined with the clang of machinery and the smell of industrial oil that he didn't know who he was without it. He came home that final day, his lunchbox in his hand, and walked past my mother without a word. He sat down in his worn leather armchair, the one I'd later replace for him as a Christmas gift, and stared at the wall. For weeks, he barely moved, a ghost haunting the living room. The shame radiating from him was a physical presence in the house, thick and suffocating. My mother, unable to cope with his depression, directed all her anxiety at me. The first pink utility notice arrived on a Tuesday. She called me at my office, her voice a frantic whisper. "They're going to shut off the power, Danny. What will we do?" I was 21, barely making enough to cover my own rent and student loan payments. But the panic in her voice was a hook in my heart. I left work early, went to their house, and saw the notice on the fridge, held up by a cheap magnet shaped like a smiling cat. It felt like a mockery. I took my father's hand. It was limp and cool. "It's okay, Dad," I said, my own voice unnaturally cheerful. "We'll figure it out." We meant I. I drove to the utility office and paid the bill with my debit card, watching the number in my checking account shrink with a lurch in my stomach. I told myself it was a loan, a temporary bridge. But I was the only one on that bridge, and I was the one who was burning it behind me. That single payment became a torrent. The next month it was the rent. The landlord was a hard-faced man who smelled of stale cigars. I met him on my parents' porch, pressing a cashier's check into his hand that represented 2 months of my own disciplined savings. My dream of a down payment on a small condo, a place that was solely mine, began to feel like a childish fantasy. It was the first major piece of my future that I sacrificed for their present. My mother hugged me, tears of relief in her eyes. "You are our angel," she'd sobbed into my shoulder. "Family first, always." The words felt warm then, a validation of my sacrifice. It took me years to realize that angels don't have lives of their own. They exist only to serve others. Then came the slow, steady bleed of everyday expenses. It was never a direct ask, just a constant stream of complaints. "The price of groceries is just unbelievable," my mother would sigh over the phone. The next day, I would show up with 3 bags filled with food. "The car is making that funny noise again," my father would mutter. The following weekend, I'd spend a Saturday in a greasy auto shop waiting room, putting the $800 repair bill on my credit card. I became a hyper-vigilant listener, my ears trained to detect the subtle hints of need, the quiet confessions of lack. I was so desperate for their approval, so terrified of their failure, that I became their proactive provider, solving problems they hadn't even asked me to solve yet. I was enabling their helplessness and calling it love. The most devastating sacrifice was my mother's surgery. It was an emergency appendectomy, but complications led to a longer hospital stay. The insurance, which they had through a bare-bones state plan, was a sieve, full of holes and high deductibles. The bills arrived in a terrifying flood, a blizzard of white envelopes that covered the dining room table. The final tally was just over $14,000. It was an impossible sum for them. Mark was at college, spending money faster than he could text, and he offered a casual, "Wow, that sucks," before asking me if I could spot him $50. All eyes, once again, turned to me. By then, through sheer force of will and by living like a monk, I had managed to scrape together a respectable savings account. It was my escape fund, a secret I held close to my chest. It was my proof that I had not been entirely consumed. Giving it up felt like a physical violation, like they were reaching into my chest and tearing out a vital organ. I remember sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, the flimsy paper of the bills trembling in my hand, and initiating the transfer on my phone. I watched the number drain from my account, a decade of careful planning and quiet dreams vanishing in 30 seconds. I walked into her hospital room and she was watching a game show, laughing weakly. I told her it was taken care of. "Oh, good," she said, her attention already back on the TV. "I knew you'd handle it." There was no comprehension of what that act had cost me. There was only the calm, serene entitlement of someone who has grown used to being rescued. Even my brother, the golden child, viewed me as his personal bank. The call for his tuition money came late one night. He was frantic, claiming the school had made a mistake with his financial aid and he was short for the semester. "I'll pay you back, Danny, I swear on my life," he'd pleaded, his voice cracking with feigned desperation. I knew even then that it was a lie. I knew he'd probably spent the money on a spring break trip or a new laptop, but the thought of him, my little brother, having to drop out of school was unbearable. My parents would be devastated. So I took out a personal loan, adding another monthly payment to my already strained budget, a debt that would follow me for 5 years. He never paid back a cent. When I gently brought it up a year later, he grew angry, defensive. "Why are you always holding things over my head?" he'd snapped. "It's not my fault you're good with money and I'm not." My parents, overhearing the call, sided with him. "Leave him be, Danielle," my father said. "He's under a lot of pressure." My ability to make and manage money wasn't seen as a skill. It was an obligation. My financial stability wasn't for me. It was for them. Through all this, I was praised, but only for my function, never for my being. I was so reliable, so responsible, so good in a crisis. I was a household appliance, a well-oiled machine that performed its duty without complaint. Mark was charming, ambitious, a dreamer. He was a person, full of potential they were willing to invest in, often with my money. My sacrifices were the soil in which his dreams were allowed to grow, while my own were left to wither on the vine. I was the forgotten one, the cast out, the one whose love was taken, used, and then, on the eve of their greatest celebration, casually, cruelly, thrown away. The living room, once a place of childhood comfort, had transformed into a courtroom. I was on trial and the verdict had already been delivered. All that remained was the sentencing, a slow, meticulous dissection of my character, my very existence, designed to justify their cruelty. My mother sat forward, adopting the patient tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a willfully difficult child. My initial shock was hardening into a cold, sharp anger, and I refused to let them dismiss me with vague platitudes. "I still don't understand," I said, my voice steadier now, laced with an icy control I didn't know I possessed. "What drama are you talking about, Mom? When have I ever caused a scene?" She exchanged a look with my father, a silent communication that spoke volumes. It was the look of two people confirming their shared, secret narrative. "Well, dear," she began, tapping a manicured nail on her knee, "you have a tendency to be a bit much. You're very passionate about your opinions." "My opinions?" I asked, incredulous. "You mean like at Thanksgiving when Uncle Robert was going on about his political conspiracy theories and I politely disagreed? That's the drama you're worried about?" "You didn't just disagree, Danielle, you debated him," she corrected, her voice taking on a wounded tone. "You made him uncomfortable. Jessica's family is very important, very well connected. We can't have you starting arguments and embarrassing the family." So that was it. My crime was having a thought, a voice. In their world, a daughter, especially an unmarried one, was meant to be a pleasant, smiling ornament. My brother could be loud, opinionated, and boorish, and it was called confidence. When I did it, it was called drama. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Jessica, sensing an opportunity to twist the knife, chimed in, her voice a sweet, venomous melody. "My father's partners from the surgical practice will be there," she said, naming a state senator and a prominent judge. "It's a very high-profile guest list. We just want to present a certain image of the family, a united, harmonious image." The implication was clear. I was the blemish on that image, the discordant note in their harmony. "And it's not just that," my mother continued, gaining momentum now, the flimsy excuses piling up one on top of the other. "It's your success, Danielle. It's wonderful, truly. But you know how Mark is. He's sensitive. You come in, talking about your big projects at work, your promotions. It just overshadows him. It makes him look less than. On his own wedding day, the audacity of the statement almost made me laugh. I had spent the last 10 years of my life actively dimming my own light so that they might feel brighter. I downplayed every achievement. When I got a major promotion, I told them I had just been given a few more responsibilities. When I received a significant bonus, the same bonus that paid for my mother's post-operative physical therapy, I told them it was just a little extra for Christmas. I had curated a version of myself for them that was palatable, non-threatening, and eternally accessible. And now they were using the very success that had sustained them as a weapon against me. It was a betrayal so complete, so fundamentally twisted, that it defied all logic. I turned my full attention to my father. He was my last resort, the final juror I could appeal to. He had always been the one I thought was grounded, fair. He was a man of few words, but I had mistaken his silence for depth. Now I saw it for what it was, a void. "Dad," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Look at me, please. Tell me you don't believe this. Tell me this is not happening." He flinched as if my words were physical blows. He shifted his weight, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of the chair. He could not meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the carpet, his jaw working silently. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the incessant ticking of the clock. It was a silence of consent, a silence of cowardice, a silence that was a louder, more profound betrayal than all of my mother's poisonous words combined. "It's for the best," he finally rasped, the words thick and gravelly. It was a pathetic echo of his earlier statement, a mantra of denial. He was not a participant in this cruelty. He was just a helpless bystander. But he wasn't. He was a co-conspirator. His inaction was an action. His silence was a scream of agreement. Mark, who had been enjoying the show, decided to add his own contribution. He finally put his phone down and looked at me, his expression a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Look, Danny, don't make this so hard. It's one day. My day. It's not about you. Why do you always have to make everything so complicated?" Complicated? The word shot out of me, sharp and hot. "I made things simple for you, Mark. I paid your tuition so you wouldn't have to drop out. I bought the groceries when Mom's account was overdrawn. I lent you the down payment for this ridiculous engagement ring," I said, gesturing to the enormous diamond on Jessica's finger, a ring I now realized was another monument built on my sacrifice. A flicker of panic crossed his face, followed by a surge of anger. Jessica's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. "You what?" she asked, looking from me to Mark. Mark recovered quickly, scoffing with a dismissive wave of his hand. "She's exaggerating. She loaned me some money. Big deal. That's what family is for, right? We help each other out." The ease with which he twisted my sacrifice into a casual, transactional favor, the way he erased the decade of my servitude, was the final, clarifying blow. They were not just ungrateful. They were revisionist historians, rewriting the past to suit their narrative of a strong, self-sufficient family that was occasionally helped out by their difficult, overly dramatic daughter. Jessica's delicate laugh, the one I had heard earlier, tinkled in the oppressive silence. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. She leaned forward, her blue eyes cold as ice chips. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "it seems we have you to thank for so much, but my family will be taking over from here. You don't need to worry about Mark anymore." The message was unmistakable. "Your services are no longer required. You have been replaced by a newer, wealthier model." The four of them were a solid, impenetrable wall of entitlement and denial. They had used me, drained me, and were now discarding the empty husk. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a fire crawling up my neck, a crushing weight on my chest. I had been a fool. My love, my loyalty, my endless giving, it had all been a terrible, one-sided transaction. And today, they had finally closed the account. The walk from the living room to my old bedroom was the longest journey of my life. Each step up the creaking staircase felt like a monumental effort, as if I were wading through thick, invisible mud. I could feel their collective gaze on my back, a palpable weight of judgment and relief. They were relieved that I hadn't made a scene, that their difficult daughter had finally learned her place and retreated without a fight. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a single tear, not until the bedroom door clicked shut behind me, the sound of the latch a final, definitive severing of a bond I once thought was unbreakable. For a long moment, I stood with my back pressed against the door, as if to barricade myself from them, from the life that was unfolding without me downstairs. The room was dark, illuminated only by the pale blue moonlight filtering through the single window. This room had been my sanctuary for 18 years, its walls silent witnesses to my childhood dreams and teenage anxieties. Now it felt like a prison cell, a monument to a past that was a lie, The faint scent of lavender and old books, a smell I had always associated with home, now seemed cloying and suffocating. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, landed on the closet door. Hanging there, pristine in its clear garment bag, was the navy dress, the ghost of a future that would never happen. I moved toward it as if in a trance, my legs stiff and unsteady. The dress was more than just fabric and thread. It was a vessel for all my foolish, stubborn hope. I had purchased it 3 months ago, on a rare Saturday I had taken for myself. I remembered standing in the boutique's dressing room, the soft, forgiving fabric skimming over my body, and for the first time in a long time, I had felt beautiful, elegant. I had pictured myself at the wedding, a proud older sister, a cherished daughter. I imagined my father's eyes lighting up when he saw me, the way he used to when I was a little girl and I'd put on one of my mother's dresses. I'd imagined a warm, genuine hug from my brother, a moment of real connection amidst the chaos of the day. That hope now seemed like a cruel joke. The dress was a costume for a role I had been fired from. With trembling fingers, I unzipped the garment bag. The material was cool and smooth beneath my hands. I lifted it off the hanger, the weight of it feeling impossibly heavy. I held it up against myself, looking at my ghostly reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw a stranger. A woman draped in the shroud of her own naivety. A wave of nausea rolled over me, hot and sickening. A sob, a raw, primal sound of agony, tore itself from my throat, and I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, the dress pooling on the floor at my feet like a dark, silken puddle. The crying, when it finally came, was a deluge. It was a violent, convulsive storm of grief for a family I had loved, but never truly had. I buried my face in the musty chenille bedspread my grandmother had made years ago, muffling the sounds of my own heart breaking. The carefully constructed dam of composure I had maintained for years finally burst, and a decade of pain, resentment, and unwept tears flooded out. The slideshow in my head began to play, no longer a series of snapshots, but a relentless, feature-length film of my own erasure. I was 22 again, sitting in my cramped apartment, the phone to my ear, listening to my mother cry about the broken water heater. I remembered the exhaustion in my bones after working a 60-hour week, and the sinking feeling as I transferred the last of my fun money to their account. Knowing the weekend trip I'd planned with friends was now impossible. "You're a lifesaver, Danny," she'd said. "Not a daughter, a lifesaver." A function. Was 25, sitting across from a man I was starting to fall for. He'd asked me about my family, and I'd painted a rosy, generic picture, ashamed to admit that my parents still relied on me, that my brother treated me like an afterthought. I remember the way he'd looked at me with a hint of pity, and I knew in that moment that he could never understand. How could I build a future with someone when my past was a financial and emotional black hole I was constantly pouring my life into? I ended it a few weeks later, using work as an excuse. It was easier than explaining the truth. I was 28, standing in a sterile hospital room, watching my mother sleep after her surgery. My father had gone home, saying he couldn't stand the smell of hospitals. Mark hadn't even visited. I was the one who stayed, who talked to the nurses, who held a cup of water to her chapped lips when she woke. I was the one who saw the mountain of bills on the kitchen counter and felt the familiar dread, the resignation. I was the one who silently paid them, sacrificing my own security without a second thought. And my reward was to be told I was too intense to be seen in public with them. All those years, I choked out between sobs, my voice a shredded whisper. For nothing. The words were a confirmation of the deepest, most terrifying fear I had carried my entire life, that I was unlovable. My worth in their eyes was directly tied to my utility. I wasn't a person to be cherished. I was a resource to be exploited. And now that a wealthier, more convenient resource had come along in the form of Jessica's family, I was being decommissioned. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was what broke me. This wasn't a thoughtless slight, an accidental oversight. This was a premeditated act. They had sat down, the four of them, and decided I was a liability. They had weighed my years of devotion against the potential for social embarrassment, and found my love wanting. I cried for the little girl who had tried so desperately to be good enough, for the young woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to prop up theirs. I cried for the fool who had mistaken obligation for affection and dependency for love. I cried until my throat was raw, my eyes were swollen shut, and my body was a hollow, aching void. The invisible daughter had finally, completely, disappeared into her own grief. The storm of grief eventually passed, not because the pain lessened, but because my body had nothing left to give. I lay on the bed for what felt like hours, a hollowed-out shell of a person, staring at the ceiling as the moonlight slowly crept across the room. The tears had stopped, leaving my face stiff and salty. The sobs had subsided, leaving an unnerving silence in their wake. It wasn't peace. It was the eerie, absolute calm that follows a devastating natural disaster. The moment when the wind dies down and you can finally see the full extent of the wreckage. In that profound stillness, my mind, stripped bare of all its hopeful illusions, began to work with a cold, terrifying clarity. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from the depths of my childhood. It wasn't a memory of my parents or my brother, but of my grandfather, my mother's father. He was a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands, solid, sturdy things that were meant to last. He smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, and his hands, though calloused and rough, had always been gentle with me. He was the only one in the family who had ever looked at me and not seen a problem to be solved or a need to be met. He had seen me. I remembered being 12 years old, sitting in his dusty, sun-drenched workshop while he explained the blueprints for a house he was building. He didn't simplify it for me. He pointed to the lines and numbers, explaining load-bearing walls, structural integrity, and the importance of a solid foundation. "Everything looks nice on the surface, Danny," he'd said, his voice a low, kind rumble. "But if the foundation is bad, the whole house will come down sooner or later. People forget that. They're too busy looking at the fancy paint." Then he'd tapped his temple. "The most important tool you'll ever have is right here. Be smart. Read the fine print. Never let anyone make you feel like you're not strong enough to hold up your own roof." His death 8 years ago had been the first real crack in my own foundation. I remembered the stifling atmosphere of the lawyer's office, the rustle of papers as his will was read. I remembered my parents' shock, and then their poorly concealed avarice. When the lawyer announced that my grandfather had left his 40% ownership stake in the Grand Oak Banquet Hall, directly and solely to me, it was his largest asset, a thriving business he had smartly invested in decades ago, the same venue that was, at this very moment, being prepared for my brother's wedding. His voice from that day in the workshop echoed in my mind, a ghostly whisper from the past. "Read the fine print." I thought of the papers my parents had pushed in front of me weeks after the funeral. "It's just to make things easier, honey," my father had said, his smile thin and strained. "We'll manage the business side of things for you. It's too complicated." They had tried to trick me into signing over my proxy rights to effectively neuter my ownership while they reaped the benefits. But my grandfather's warning had made me cautious. I had refused. After a tense week of them calling me ungrateful and difficult, we had reached a compromise. I signed a limited operational agreement, but retained my full 40% share, my voting rights, and my legal standing as a primary partner. And as my grandfather had taught me, I had kept my own copies of everything. A jolt of adrenaline shot through my exhausted body, a feeling so potent it was almost painful. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, sharper. It was power. I slid off the bed, my movements no longer sluggish with grief but filled with a new, quiet purpose. In the back of my closet, buried beneath old college textbooks and sweaters I hadn't worn in years, was a heavy, fireproof document box. I pulled it out, blew a layer of dust off the top, and clicked it open. My fingers, steady as a surgeon's, flipped past my birth certificate, my social security card, my car title, until they found the thick folder labeled simply GO LLC. I took the folder back to the bed and, using the weak light from my phone, spread the documents across the chenille bedspread. The dry legal language that had once seemed so intimidating now looked like a beautiful secret code. I scanned the partnership agreement, my eyes flying across the page, my accountant's mind absorbing the clauses with an efficiency that had long been my professional trademark. Clause 7B, any event hosted on the premises with a projected cost exceeding $50,000 requires the explicit sign-off of all partners holding a 20% or greater share. I knew for a fact that Mark and Jessica's wedding budget was nearly double that amount. My signature was nowhere on their contract with the venue. My parents had likely leveraged their relationship with the on-site manager, a man who had known our family for years, to bypass the formality, never imagining I would ever find out, or if I did, that I would ever object. Clause 11C. Any partner may place a temporary administrative hold on venue operations pending a full financial review if there is reasonable cause to suspect outstanding liabilities to the business. I smiled, a thin, humorless stretching of my lips. Reasonable cause. I had seen the overdue invoices from the venue on the kitchen counter just last week, tucked under a pile of junk mail. My mother had been ignoring them, planning, I was sure, to use the wedding gift money to cover the final balance after the fact. It was a classic move of theirs. Spend money they didn't have and assume I would be the safety net if they fell. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of stunning, irrefutable clarity. They had not only banished me from the wedding, they had done so while illegally using my asset as the venue and while being in debt to our shared business. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a colossal, arrogant blunder. My tears were gone, replaced by an Arctic calm. Despair had been burned away, leaving behind the hard, unyielding bedrock of my grandfather's legacy. He had given me more than just shares in a business. He had given me a shield. He had given me a weapon. And he had trusted that I would know when and how to use it. The plan formed in my mind, not with the heat of vengeful passion, but with the cold, methodical logic of a chess master cornering a king. I would not scream. I would not confront them. I would not give them the drama they expected. Revenge was messy. This was business. I would simply enforce the terms of the contract. I would make one phone call, and I would let the fine print do the rest. They had wanted me to vanish. They were about to get their wish. But they had forgotten that a ghost can still haunt the house, and an owner can still lock the doors. I did not sleep that night. Sleep was a luxury for those at peace, and I was anything but. I was a soldier on the eve of a battle. My mind a landscape of strategic maps and calculated maneuvers. The grief and pain were still there, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach, but they were no longer my commanders. They were simply the terrain over which I had to march. My new commander was a quiet, ruthless clarity, a voice that sounded remarkably like my grandfather's, whispering, "A foundation has rules. You don't bend them, you enforce them." When the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, I was already up. I moved with a deliberate, silent grace, a ghost in the house that was still mine in memory, but no longer in spirit. I showered, the hot water washing away the grime of yesterday's tears, but not the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I did not look at the navy dress, crumpled on the floor like a fallen flag. Instead, I opened my suitcase and pulled out the outfit I had packed for the rehearsal dinner. A charcoal gray pantsuit, impeccably tailored, with a crisp white silk blouse. It was professional, severe, and utterly devoid of celebration. It was my armor. As I dressed, the house began to stir. I could hear my mother's frantic, excited voice on the phone in the hallway, likely coordinating with the hairstylist. I heard my father's heavy footsteps downstairs, the clatter of the coffee pot. I heard Mark's loud, obnoxious laughter as he rehashed a story from his bachelor party with a friend over the phone. They were all so absorbed in the performance of the perfect day, so wrapped up in the grand illusion, that they had become deaf and blind to everything else. They did not hear me zip my suitcase. They did not see the shadow of my departure. I walked down the stairs, my sensible heels making no sound on the carpeted runner. My mother bustled past me in the hall, a phone pressed to her ear, a whirlwind of hairspray and nervous energy. She shot me a brief, irritated glance, a look that said, "You're still here?" before turning her back to me and continuing her conversation. She didn't ask where I was going. She didn't care. My erasure was so complete in her mind that my physical presence was now an inconvenience. It was the last look she would ever give me that wasn't tainted by panic or rage. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. The click of the latch a final, quiet goodbye to the life I had tried so hard to be a part of. The drive to the Grand Oak was surreal. The sun was bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was a perfect day for a wedding. Other cars on the road were filled with families, laughing, heading to brunch or a park. I was heading to war. During the 20-minute drive, my resolve was tested. A small, frightened voice in the back of my mind, the voice of the old Danielle, began to whisper, "Is this really necessary? It's your brother's wedding. You can still turn back. Just let it go. Don't cause drama." It was the voice of a girl who had been conditioned to accept scraps and call it a feast. But then another voice, my grandfather's voice, rose to meet it, calm and firm. "Respect is not given, Danielle. It is maintained. You are not causing drama. You are restoring order." I pulled into the sprawling parking lot of the Grand Oak. It was a beautiful, stately building, a modern rendition of a classic manor, surrounded by acres of manicured lawns and ancient oak trees. It was a place built for fairy tales. I could already see the first signs of the day's preparations. A large white floral van was backing up to a service entrance. A refrigerated truck from the caterer was idling near the kitchens. Staff in crisp black uniforms were moving purposefully behind the large glass windows. I was about to walk into the heart of this well-oiled machine and throw a wrench into its gears. I walked in through the main entrance, my briefcase in hand, feeling the cool kiss of the air conditioning on my skin. The lobby was grand, with a soaring ceiling and a magnificent crystal chandelier that rivaled the one in my parents' home. A young woman at the reception desk gave me a polite, professional smile. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm here to see Robert Henderson," I said, my voice even and calm. "I'm a partner in the LLC." Her smile faltered slightly. The word partner carried a weight that guest did not. She picked up her phone and spoke in a low voice. A moment later, a side door opened and Mr. Henderson emerged. He was a portly man in his late 50s with a florid face and an air of perpetual, low-grade stress. He had managed the venue for as long as I could remember and had known my family for years. When he saw me, his face broke into a wide, relieved smile. "Danielle, what a pleasant surprise," he boomed, bustling toward me with his hand outstretched. "Here for a sneak peek of the ballroom? It looks absolutely breathtaking. Your mother has outdone herself." I did not take his hand. I simply met his gaze. "Hello, Robert. I'm not here for a sneak peek. I'm here on business." His smile wavered. He noticed my suit, my briefcase, the hard, unyielding expression in my eyes. The jovial host persona evaporated, replaced by a cautious manager. "Oh, well, of course. Come into my office." His office was cluttered, filled with stacks of binders, seating charts, and fabric swatches. He gestured for me to sit, and then settled heavily behind his large oak desk. "So," he said, forcing a cheerful tone, "what can I do for you on this busy, busy day?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I opened my briefcase and laid the folder on his desk. "As you know, I am a 40% owner of this establishment, as bequeathed to me by my grandfather, David Allen." "Yes, of course, Danielle. We're all very proud of what your grandfather built," he said, a note of confusion in his voice. "Then you must also be aware of the terms of the partnership agreement," I continued, my voice a flat monotone. I slid a copy across the desk to him, my finger pointing to the first highlighted clause. Per Clause 7B, any event with a projected cost exceeding $50,000 requires the explicit written consent of all partners holding a 20% or greater share. "This wedding," I said, tapping another document, the budget proposal I had found in my mother's desk drawer, "is projected to cost $94,000. My signature is not on any contract." Mr. Henderson's face began to lose its color. He picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the text as if hoping the words would change. "Danielle, this is just a formality," he stammered. "Your mother assured me she had your full approval." "It's your brother's wedding, for heaven's sake!" "My mother was mistaken," I said coldly. I slid another document forward. "Furthermore, per Clause 11C, any partner may place a temporary administrative hold on venue operations if there is reasonable cause to suspect outstanding liabilities to the business. According to your own accounting department, the Harris wedding account has an outstanding balance of over $20,000 due 3 days ago." The blood drained completely from his face. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of panic and disbelief. He was trapped and he knew it. "Danielle, please," he whispered, his voice pleading. "We can't do this. The guests will be here in a few hours. Your family." "This is not a family matter, Robert." I cut him off, my voice sharp and final. "This is a business matter. As of this moment, I am exercising my rights as a partner. I am placing an immediate administrative hold on all operations related to the Harris Walker wedding. Nothing gets unloaded. Nothing gets set up. No staff is to work on this event until the outstanding balance is paid in full, and a new contract is presented to me for my signature. If you proceed in violation of these terms, you will be in breach of your fiduciary duty to the LLC, and I will be forced to pursue immediate legal action against you personally and this business as a whole." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He saw the iron resolve in my eyes. He saw the legally binding documents on his desk. He saw the end of his career if he defied me. The fight went out of him, replaced by a weary, terrified resignation. He slowly reached for his phone. "Who are you calling?" I asked. Your mother," he stammered. "No," I said. "You will call your heads of staff. You will call the catering supervisor. You will call the lead florist. You will instruct them to halt all work on this event immediately. My parents are no longer your point of contact on this matter." "I am." Defeated, he nodded. He began to make the calls, his voice a choked, miserable monotone. I sat in the chair opposite him, a silent, implacable statue, listening as he systematically dismantled my brother's perfect day. I heard him tell the head of catering to keep the food in the trucks. I heard him tell the florist to stop unloading the centerpieces. I heard him instruct his floor manager to close and lock the ballroom doors. When he was finished, he slumped in his chair, looking 10 years older. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his desk, at the ruin of his day. I stood up and calmly gathered my documents, placing them back in my briefcase with a soft, definitive click. I did not offer a word of comfort. I did not offer an apology. I had come to do a job, and the job was done. I walked to the door of his office. As I left, I could see through the large windows into the main hall. A team of decorators who had been hanging white ribbons from the chandeliers had stopped, looking confused. The lead florist was arguing heatedly into his phone. The machine had been shut down. I walked out of the grand oak and into the bright morning sun. I did not look back. I got in my car and drove away. The silence in the car a perfect echo of the silence of my actions. I had not raised my voice. I had not shed a tear. I had simply held up the mirror of consequence to my family and let them see the reflection of their own actions. I did not go home. I did not go anywhere familiar. I drove for an hour, heading north, with no destination in mind, just a primal need to put distance between myself and the crater where my family used to be. The windows were down, the wind whipping through my hair, a chaotic sound that felt soothingly external. It was a noise that wasn't coming from inside my own head. After a while, I saw a sign for a small town I'd never heard of, and on impulse, I took the exit. I found a quiet, clean-looking motel on the edge of town, paid for a room in cash, and locked the door behind me. The room was anonymous, sterile, and blessedly silent. It was a perfect blank slate. I took my phone out of my purse, looked at the dark screen for a long moment, and then turned it off and put it in the bottom of my suitcase. I did not want to be found. I did not want to be reached. My part in the day's events was over. The rest was up to them. I spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. I showered again, washing the last remnants of my old home off of me. I lay on the stiff, starched sheets of the motel bed and stared at the popcorn ceiling, tracing the meaningless patterns with my eyes. There was no triumph, no giddy rush of vindictive pleasure. There was only a vast hollow emptiness. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my own life, and while I knew it was a necessary act of demolition, I was now standing in the quiet, dusty aftermath, alone. To distract myself, I opened a sketchbook I always carried with me and began to draw. The pattern on the curtains, the way the light fell across the cheap laminate dresser. I lost myself in the lines and shadows, the only world I had any control over. Meanwhile, 70 miles south, the world I had abandoned was beginning to implode. As I sketched the serene stillness of my motel room, chaos was erupting at the Grand Oak. At 3:45 in the afternoon, the first guests began to arrive. They were a glittering procession of wealth and social standing, Jessica's family and their extensive network. Women in jewel-toned silk dresses and men in crisp tuxedos emerged from luxury sedans, their laughter echoing in the perfect afternoon air. They walked up the grand stone steps and into the lobby, expecting champagne and classical music. Instead, they found a confused bottleneck of people and a handful of flustered-looking venue staff offering vague apologies. The grand doors to the ballroom remained shut, flanked by two stone-faced security guards Mr. Henderson had been forced to hire. "We're sorry. There's a slight delay with the preparations," they repeated in a monotonous loop. "Please feel free to enjoy a drink at the lobby bar on a cash basis." The phrase, cash basis, sent the first ripple of alarm through the well-heeled crowd. At 4 o'clock, my mother, radiant and brittle in a powder blue mother-of-the-groom dress, swept into the lobby, her face a mask of serene hospitality. She saw the crowd and her smile tightened. "What's all this?" she asked the nearest staff member, her voice tinkling with false charm. "Shouldn't the doors be open by now?" The young man avoided her eyes. "There's a management issue, Mrs. Harris. I'm not at liberty to discuss it." My mother's charm evaporated. "Get me Mr. Henderson," she commanded. "Mr. Henderson is in a meeting and cannot be disturbed." Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her composure. She saw the florist's van, still parked by the service entrance, the crew standing beside it, smoking cigarettes and looking bored. She saw the caterers, who should have been circulating with trays of hors d'oeuvres, instead packing up boxes and loading them back onto their truck. She rushed outside, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass, and confronted the catering supervisor. "What are you doing? The reception is about to start." The man, tired of the drama, was blunt. "My orders are to pull out, ma'am." The venue management froze the account. "We haven't been paid and we're not working for free." Her face went white. She fumbled in her purse for her credit card, the one she always used for emergencies, the one for which I was a co-signer and had paid the balance on more times than I could count. She thrust it at him. "Here, I'll pay you right now." He shook his head. "It's not about the money anymore, ma'am. It's a contractual issue with the venue. Our hands are tied. He turned his back on her and went back to directing his crew. At that moment, Mark and Jessica emerged from a side room, a perfect, glowing couple ready for their grand entrance. Jessica was a vision in white, her dress a cloud of lace and tulle, her face a masterpiece of professional makeup. Mark looked handsome and confident in his tuxedo. They saw the chaos in the lobby, the closed doors, the angry guests, and their smiles faltered. "Mom, what's going on?" Mark demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. "Why isn't anyone being seated?" Before she could answer, Jessica's father, Dr. Walker, a tall, imposing man with an air of absolute authority, strode over to them, his face a thundercloud. "Evelyn," he said to my mother, his voice dangerously low, "what is the meaning of this? My friends, my colleagues are standing around this lobby like stranded tourists. This is not what we agreed to. This is not what I paid for." My mother started to stammer out an excuse, but just then a shriek came from the bridal suite. It was Jessica. She had just been informed by her wedding planner that the 6-foot-tall, $10,000 wedding cake had been refused delivery and was currently on its way back to the bakery. The perfect day was unraveling in real time, thread by thread, in front of a captive audience of their most important social connections. Mark began shouting at the security guards, his voice cracking with impotent rage. Jessica, her perfect composure finally shattering, burst into tears, black streaks of mascara running down her porcelain cheeks. Her mother tried to comfort her while her father got on the phone, presumably to his lawyer, his voice a low, furious snarl. My parents just stood in the middle of it all, looking helpless and horrified, the architects of a grand design that had suddenly, inexplicably collapsed around them. The guests whispered, their expressions ranging from pity to morbid curiosity. The harmonious image Jessica had been so desperate to project was a smoldering wreck. The fairy tale had become a farce. And the one person whose name was likely being cursed, screamed and whispered in every corner of that chaotic lobby wasn't even there. I was 70 miles away in a quiet room, sketching the shadows on a wall, my absence a more powerful and destructive force than my presence could ever have been. As evening fell, I left the quiet solitude of the motel room. I found a small family-owned diner on the town's main street and slid into a booth in the corner. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was comforting, normal. I ordered a cheeseburger and a chocolate milkshake, a meal I hadn't allowed myself in years, always too conscious of budgets and saving for the next inevitable family crisis. As I ate, I watched the other patrons, a family with 2 young kids, an elderly couple sharing a piece of pie, a group of teenagers laughing in a nearby booth. It was a glimpse into a world I hadn't known, a world where evenings were simple and uncomplicated. For the first time in a decade, I felt a flicker of something that resembled peace. It was almost 9 o'clock when I returned to my room. The quiet had started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a vacuum. I knew I couldn't put it off forever. The silence was my choice, but the fallout was still a reality I had to face. I took a deep breath, walked over to my suitcase and retrieved my phone. My hand trembled slightly as I held down the power button. The moment the screen lit up, it was like opening a floodgate. A tsunami of digital desperation poured in. The phone buzzed and vibrated violently in my hand for nearly 2 full minutes as a torrent of notifications loaded. 97 missed calls, over 200 text messages, 34 voicemails. My thumb hovered over the screen, a strange, detached curiosity washing over me. I decided to start with the texts, a digital archaeology of their descent into madness. The first messages were from that morning, from my mother. "Where are you? The hairstylist is here," followed by "Danielle, this isn't funny. Call me." Then came the messages from Mark around midday. "Hey, have you seen Mom? She's freaking out about something at the hall. Call her." The tone shifted dramatically around 4 o'clock. The messages became a chaotic, overlapping chorus of panic and fury from all of them. From my mother, Danielle Harris, "You answer this phone right now. What did you do?" From Mark, "You bitch. You fucking evil bitch. You did this on purpose." From Jessica, "I hope you're happy. I hope you rot." From my father, the only one who seemed to grasp for some semblance of reason, "Danielle, there is a misunderstanding at the hall. Please call me. We can fix this." The messages continued like this, a relentless barrage of blame, hatred, and pathetic, misspelled threats. They had tried and convicted me in absentia, never once stopping to consider their own role in the disaster. As I scrolled, my phone began to ring. The screen flashed with a name I hadn't seen in years, an old high school friend who was a guest at the wedding. I ignored it. Then it rang again. This time the caller ID simply said Mark. I stared at it, my heart a slow, steady drum. I took a breath and swiped to answer. I didn't say anything. "I just listened! You!" he screamed, his voice raw and distorted with rage. There was no greeting, no preamble, just pure, undiluted fury. "You ruined my life. My one day, my one perfect day, and you destroyed it. Jessica is a mess. Her parents hate us. Everyone was laughing at us. How could you be so selfish? So jealous? I always knew you hated me." His tirade went on, a breathless, incoherent spew of accusations. I was jealous of his happiness. I was bitter that I was alone. I was a monster who had planned this all along just to hurt him. I let him scream until he ran out of breath, his rage collapsing into ragged, pathetic sobs. When he finally fell silent, the only sound was his labored breathing. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice so calm it sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Why?" he choked out. "Just tell me why you did it." "I didn't do anything, Mark," I said, the words simple, clean, and true. "I wasn't there. I just stayed away like you asked me to." There was a stunned silence on his end. He had expected me to scream back, to cry, to defend myself. My calm was a bucket of ice water on his bonfire of rage. "This is because of that?" He finally sputtered, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Because we asked you not to come? You ruined my wedding over that?" "You didn't ask, Mark. You told me. And it wasn't over that. It was because of it," I said. "Goodbye." I ended the call before he could respond. The phone immediately rang again. My mother. I answered on the first ring. "Danielle Elizabeth Harris, you listen to me!" she shrieked, her voice a shrill, piercing weapon. "You have embarrassed this family in a way I never thought possible. Jessica's father is threatening to sue us for every penny we have. Our friends, our neighbors. They all saw it. They saw us get thrown out of our own son's wedding. How could you do this to me? After everything I have done for you?" The sheer breathtaking delusion of that last sentence almost made me laugh. I let her go on, her voice rising in pitch and hysteria. A long, rambling monologue about her social ruin, her humiliation, her broken heart. It was a masterclass in narcissism, a performance in which she was the sole victim. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. "You were worried I would cause drama, Mom," I said, my voice as placid as a frozen lake. "I believe I was the only person who didn't cause any drama at all today. I was 70 miles away. This isn't about drama, this is about respect. This is about loyalty," she screamed. "Yes," I agreed softly. "It is." I hung up. The final call came a minute later. "My father," I answered, expecting more yelling, more blame. But his voice was different. It was quiet, shaking, utterly broken. "Danny?" he began, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Danny girl, please." The old childhood nickname was a clumsy, desperate attempt to find a crack in my armor. It almost worked. "What is it, Dad?" I asked. "Just fix this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I don't know what you did, or how you did it, but you're the smart one. You can fix this, please. Jessica's family, they're talking about fraud, about breach of contract. They want the ring back. Just name your price, Danielle. Tell us what you want. We'll pay you. Just make it all go away." And there it was, the truth, in its purest, most pathetic form. After all the yelling and the shrieking, it all came down to this. He didn't see me as a daughter who had been grievously wounded. He didn't think an apology was in order. He saw me as he had always seen me, the fixer, a problem to be managed, a situation to be resolved, a service that could be purchased. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was trying to hire a contractor to repair the foundation of the house he himself had set on fire. A profound, sad calm washed over me. The last vestiges of my old life, the last lingering threads of hope that they might, on some level, actually love me, withered and turned to dust. "You told me not to be there," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "So I wasn't." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "But you forgot I was never really gone." I ended the call and did what I should have done a decade ago. I blocked his number. Then I blocked my mother's. Then Mark's. One by one, I erased them from my digital life. I sat in the silence of the motel room, my phone finally quiet in my hand. There was no victory in my heart, only a vast, desolate, and utterly liberating peace. The war was over, and I was, for the first time in my life, free. The days that followed were a strange mixture of legal maneuvering and profound, personal quiet. The storm I had unleashed continued to rage, but it was now raging at a distance, a tempest behind a thick wall of soundproof glass. Jessica's family, true to their word, sicked their high-powered lawyers on everyone involved. Letters of intent to sue were sent to my parents, to the venue, and of course to me. My parents predictably fell apart. They left me a string of increasingly desperate voicemails from my mother's work phone, the only number I hadn't yet blocked, begging me to call off the lawyers, to take responsibility for the mess I had made. But I had made my mess with precision and care. I hired a lawyer of my own, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright. I forwarded her the threatening letters and gave her a calm, chronological account of the events, complete with copies of my partnership agreement and the venue's outstanding invoices. When she had reviewed everything, she leaned back in her leather chair and a slow, appreciative smile spread across her face. "Ms. Harris," she said, "you have done nothing wrong. In fact, you acted to protect the LLC from the liability your parents were incurring. The Walkers have no case against you. Your parents, on the other hand, have committed textbook contract fraud. You hold all the cards." She handled everything from that point on. She sent a cease and desist letter to Jessica's family's legal team, outlining my protected status as a partner acting in the company's best interest. The threats against me evaporated. She then communicated with the other silent partners of the Grand Oak, who were horrified to learn of the managerial oversight and the fraudulent booking. An emergency board meeting was called. I attended via video conference, a disembodied professional face on a laptop screen. I did not mention my family drama. I simply presented the facts of the financial and contractual breaches. The outcome was swift. Mr. Henderson was fired. My parents were sent a bill for the full cost of the aborted wedding, including damages for the catering, floral, and staffing cancellations, along with a formal notice banning them from the property. They had tried to banish me, and in the end, they were the ones who were cast out. But my victory felt hollow as long as I was still tied to them, still connected through the business my grandfather had left me. That partnership was the last chain binding me to my old life, and I knew I needed to break it to be truly free. With Ms. Albright's guidance, I initiated a formal buyout process to sell my 40% share. The remaining partners, eager to scrub the stain of the Harris family drama from their business, quickly agreed. We negotiated a fair market price, a sum that was, to my astonishment, life-changing. The day I signed the final papers was overcast and gray, a fittingly somber end to that chapter of my life. I sat in Ms. Albright's gleaming downtown office, the city skyline behind her, and signed my name over and over again. With the final stroke of the pen, I felt a lightness in my chest, as if a physical weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. She slid a cashier's check across the mahogany table. The number written on it made my hand shake. It wasn't just money. It was restitution. It was a refund for a decade of my life. It was my future, handed back to me. I did not stick around to watch the final collapse of my family. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica had left Mark. Her family's social standing could not withstand the public humiliation, and their love, it turned out, was not strong enough to survive a canceled wedding cake. I heard my parents had to take out a second mortgage on their house to pay the legal bills and the damages owed to the venue. Their financial ruin was a direct consequence of their emotional cruelty. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a distant, detached sadness for the people they might have been, for the family we could have been, and then I let it go. I packed up my small apartment, selling or donating most of my belongings. I kept only the things that were truly mine, things that held memories untainted by their influence. My grandfather's old sketchbook, a box of my favorite books, the quilt my grandmother had made. I packed it all into my 10-year-old car and I drove west. I didn't have a plan or a destination, just a deep, instinctual pull toward a new beginning. I ended up in a small, vibrant city nestled in the mountains, a place where no one knew my name or my story. I rented a bright, airy apartment with a large window that looked out onto the peaks. For the first time, I decorated a space just for me. I filled it with color, with art, with plants. I turned the second bedroom into a studio, the studio I had been dreaming of since I was a child. I bought canvases and paints and I began to create, not for anyone else, but for the sheer selfish joy of it. My life became a tapestry of small, quiet pleasures. The taste of my morning coffee on my own private balcony. The feeling of a successful brushstroke. The sound of laughter with new friends I made in a pottery class. People who knew me only as Danielle, the artist, not Danielle, the fixer. I started hiking, losing myself in the silence of the forest, feeling my own strength in the burn of my muscles as I climbed. One afternoon, a letter arrived, forwarded from my old address. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. My heart gave a familiar, painful lurch. I almost threw it away, but some part of me needed to close the final door. I opened it. It was a long, rambling, self-pitying letter, full of blame, accusations, and a single, half-hearted line that was the closest she could come to an apology. "I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, but you didn't have to destroy us." I read the letter without tears. I took it out to my balcony, and with a small lighter, I set the corner of the paper on fire. I watched as the flames consumed her words, turning the bitter ink and flimsy paper into gray, weightless ash. I watched as the wind caught the ash and scattered it over the mountains until nothing remained. It was then that I knew I had truly forgiven them, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving them of their sins. It was about absolving myself of the need to carry them any longer. My peace wasn't about their destruction. It was about no longer needing their validation, their approval, or their love. It was about finally choosing myself. I'm sitting in my studio now. The afternoon sun is streaming through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a warm, golden glow on a half-finished canvas on my easel. It's a painting of the mountains I can see from my balcony, their peaks sharp and strong against a vast open sky. It's a view I never get tired of. It feels like freedom. Sometimes I think about that night, the night my family decided I was disposable. I think about the person I was then, the girl who measured her worth by how much she could give away, the woman who thought love was something you had to earn through endless sacrifice, and I feel a deep, profound compassion for her. She was just trying to survive, just trying to be loved in the only way she knew how. What I know now is that you can't earn love from people who are incapable of giving it. And you can't build a foundation on cracked, unsteady ground. My family taught me that. But my grandfather taught me how to build my own house, on my own terms, on a foundation of self-respect. When family tells you you're not welcome, sometimes the greatest response is silence and walking away. I chose peace, not vengeance. But it's a peace they'll never get to touch again. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped saving them from destroying themselves. And in doing so, I finally saved myself. Have you ever been betrayed like this? Have you ever had to choose between your family and your own survival? Share your story in the comments. Hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more, because your story matters too.